Okay, guys, so sorry I'm not there today. Kyle's a bit sick, so I'm at home, but hopefully this will explain what you're going to do today. If you have any questions, you can always send me something over Remind, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can, if possible. But hopefully this will give you a brief overview, so kind of to understand what today will be is I have to teach you a little bit of stuff so that you can be able to write your essay, but basically you're going to be working on your period 4 essay today as a work day. So unfortunately what that does mean, which I'm sure you guys won't complain too badly about, there are 2 dates that we are going to have to move. So if you look on this, the quiz and the test are going to have to move back a day. So that means that the next quiz will actually be November 6th and 7th. And then the next test will be the 8th, and then I believe it goes back down to the next Monday. So just make sure you change that in your planners. I'm going to keep the not so typical and the LEQ the exact same, just for easiness. But just overall, just make sure you know that little bit of a change. Obviously, those first 2 bullets don't count because we are in the next quarter of stuff. So what I need you to do, though, is I need you to grab out your tractor notes. So you can just pause this and then grab them out and then restart it. So I'm assuming now you have your tractor notes. If not, pause it, grab it, whatever you can do. And then we'll go ahead and get started. So if you're on your tractor notes, which you should have out by now, go ahead and flip to the back page, which looks like this. So then pause this now until you flip to the back. Okay, so we're just going to take some quick notes. So if you have out your highlighters and different things like that, then you'll be good to go. But we're just going to go over some really quick things because you have to know this information so that you can be able to actually write your essay today. So, because B-Day just barely missed this stuff. If you are A-Day on Tuesday, then skip to the timestamp that I have above this video. So, in terms of this page, basically this is going to go over the positives and negatives as well as the changes in continuities during the market revolution. So this is kind of a summary of everything that we've learned so far. So in terms of the positives of the market revolution, so the very first thing that you should make sure to highlight in STAR is about women's rights. That's usually the most commonly referenced on the AP exam, is how women began to get more rights, and in particular with the Lowell system and Lowell girl system as well. And then, I did a lot here, but that's okay. So then other things I would note too, number 2 and number 3 are really similar. Both of those are examples of really how the first industrial revolution kind of came out and changed it. So 2 is more the market revolution impact, and then 3 is the first industrial revolution explanation. So everything that's on this page that's in yellow would be a highlight. Anything that's red is something that you would use your pencil to go ahead and fill out. Increased food supply, that's just because, it's becoming more effective with the mechanical reaper and the steel plow. Number 5, these high wages. So one thing I wanted to make sure you know is the industrial paternalism. Another good word for that is also going to be welfare capitalism, which we've talked about in the past. Remember, that's where the Lowell system began to have business owners treat their workers more like family. Because remember, you had to convince the dads to send their daughters off to this working place. And then also I want you to add too, this is also the beginning of labor groups. It's not a labor union yet because those don't really exist until the late 1800s. But people do begin to advocate for better wages and different things like that. So it's our early form of labor unions. And then of course I did that. Okay, so in terms of the negatives, the first 2 are less common to talk about, but would be really good for a market revolution essay. Again, they've always been saying that there's going to be DBQ someday, and I'm sure one day there will be. But massive amounts of pollution, that's mostly because it's a factory environment. Deforestation, that's because we're starting to produce more and more agriculture. And then number 3 is really the one to highlight. And again, that's mostly because while women do still get rights, they're still very much confined to that cult of domesticity. And then the massive increase in slavery, which is going to be that black belt and that cotton gin. If you are in one of my classes today, I know that we did not cover the black belt, but we will cover that when I get home, when I come back to school. But you won't need it for this essay, so you should be fine. So this is really what we care about. So if you guys want to go ahead and bracket between continuities and changes and star that, that's really what we're going to be focusing on heavily today. Is really what stayed the same during the market revolution and what continued. So let's go ahead and let's go through. And I know this looks really bad. Sorry, I'm limited by Google Drive. But anyway, so if you want to bracket 1 through 3, really all that is women. So while we like to say that the Lowell system really was a change, you have to remember that really until 1970, women are going to continue to be in several different things. Let's go through them. So number one, women are still living virtuous and religious-driven lives. That's that cult of domesticity. So even if we give them all the rights in the world, women are still going to be said, your job is two things: stay home and make babies. And you have to be a Christian or else you're not a good female. Because remember, if you think back to the Lowell system, while the Lowell system did provide women more rights, they were required to still go to church, read the Bible, or else they actually got fired. Imagine if today, if you didn't go to church and you didn't read the Bible, if you could be fired from any job. That's how that number one is talking about. Number two is women are still in the pink job role positions. And I have this too on the top. While women still did gain more rights in the Lowell system, most were still very much confined, and that's kind of through all these different things. And pink jobs are a really good example of how that is. So a pink job is what is called a stereotypical woman's jobs. So what I'm about to say again is not accurate, but it's stereotypical. So for example, women are teachers, men are doctors, women are secretaries, men are engineers. That's what we've been trained in our minds since you're a little kid, that you're confined into this gender role. So the reality is that especially today, obviously gender roles don't exist, but I want to give you an example. You've probably all heard the riddle before that says a dad is driving his son and gets into a car accident. They rush to the hospital. The child goes underneath to get surgery when the doctor says, I can't operate on this person, that's my son. And you say, well, how is that possible? He was in the car accident. And as you know, that's because that's the mom. But why is it the first time that you hear that riddle that you begin to think that, well, that has to be the dad? That's because of pink jobs. And that's because we assume that men are typically in those types of roles and women are in pink roles. So a pink job role is anything that you are stereotypically a woman. So if you think about this this time, the Lowell system. So while the Lowell system gave a lot of people opportunities, the reality is it was working in textiles, sewing, and clothing. Well, that's a pink job. Women are expected to work in textile. Women are expected to work on clothing just as they have for hundreds of years as homemakers, making more and more clothing. Although obviously if you want to relate this to today, pink jobs are definitely changing. I was just barely reading something recently that said it's now switched that the majority of engineering students are now female. That's a huge change that just happened this last year. And I don't know if that is necessarily in 100% of colleges, but I know I read it in the city sometimes. So things are beginning to change. And then number three, women are still seen as less than men. So for example, if you go back to our thing that we talked about previously, is that women are going to continue to stay mostly in the home. And even if they go to work, they're not going to be the bosses. They're not going to be the ones that are in charge, and they're definitely going to be paid less. Number four, still dependent on agricultural society. Remember, that is the word agrarian. That's a great word to be able to use. And that's going to continue up until World War II. This next one, mercantilism and cash crop economies. That's really just cash crops and really dependent on trade. So mercantilism, remember, means dependent on trade with certain nations. Really, the agrarian societies are still going to focus on that same things. And these are those cash economies where cash crops are going to be popular. And then the locations of agriculture stay the same. I did have somebody yesterday on A-Day ask me, what is a necessary crop? A necessary crop is going to be something that you have to have. So, for example, you don't need tobacco, you don't need indigo, and you don't need cotton. There's other solutions. And yet, we still need grains, milk, things like that. So that's a necessary crop. And the South is still going to make cash crops, which again are crops that you don't have to have, you solely make to be able to make money, which is why a cash crop is going to be spent or cost a lot more money to buy compared to a necessary crop. It's the same reason why if you go to buy an iPhone, which is not a necessary product, that's a cash crop product basically, that's going to be hundreds of dollars, whereas you go to the store, you need to buy, let's say, milk to be able to survive, and that's going to be much cheaper. So that's why cash crop farmers are going to make a lot of money compared to necessary crop farmers in the north, which aren't going to make that much money. So talking about the changes. So choice in industry and goods, that's just because you have more options in the marketplace. So for example, now you don't just have to have linen and wool clothing, you can have cotton clothing. Number two, if you want to highlight that merchant economy, we talked about that previously, but again, everything's now going to be based on stores and making more and more money. Massive advances in technology, that's the first industrial revolution. So we've talked about that in the past. Women more prevalent in the workplace, that's most commonly going to be the Lowell system. And then that brings us to the next one, Lowell system, which brings industrial paternalism, which is also known as welfare capitalism. You talked about that before. And number 7 is the increase in slavery and the general movement to the Black Belt. 2 more things I want to add really quickly. So the first one is the movement from the home to the workplace and factories. That's one big change that happens as well. So now you're not just going to be making clothing in your home. You're not just going to be making guns in your home. You're going to be going out and actually being more factory driven. And then the second one, men are going to move into those industrial factory positions, which also can be back into a continuity. Women are still going to be confined to the home and men are in the factories. And really, other than the Lowell system, that's going to continue. And then that's also what's known as a separate sphere. So separate spheres mean that women have one role, men are in their own role. So for example, women's jobs, stay home, make babies, that's their sphere. Men's sphere is going to be in the workplace to make money. That's when you hear men go off and bring home the bacon. That's because men are expected to go and make the money and then bring it home to the wife that's at home with the kids. And the last one on the changes is the South begins a massive trading to Europe with cotton. And then that's going to be kind of a driving factor when we get into the Civil War later. So now you need to open up your T-charts. Now we're going to actually talk about your assignment. So if you open up your T-chart, you open up the assignment, go ahead and click that. If you need time, pause this video and then go and get it, but it should look like this. You will notice a slight change. It did slightly change the LEQ prompt, but oh well, it's fine. It's the T-chart. Okay, so if you look right here, this is going to be your essay prompt. Now, we are going to be doing this individually. So while you can ask your friends for help today of like, what would you write for this? Do you think this looks good? That's fine, but you should not be working together. Think about on the AP exam. You don't have friends on the AP exam, but if you do, you get your scores canceled and everybody else's. So don't do that. So if you look at this, this is a really, really, really good essay and a little bit harder than the last essay. It's a little bit more specific. So let's analyze it really quickly. So first, let's find the large topic. So see if you can find the large topic of this essay. So you should have gotten market revolution. So we know we're doing a market revolution essay. That should be obvious. Next, we're going to find the subtopic. So go ahead and search for the subtopic in this essay. So you should have that it is women's lives. So now we know that we're looking at women's lives in the larger market revolution. Now go ahead and look at your time frame. And you have to think what's in that time frame. And at first glance, you're not going to know. We haven't gone to 1850, 1800, you're like, oh, midnight judges. Well, that doesn't really apply to women. So we can assume, though, that that time period is going to be the large topic. So if you ever get an essay like this and you don't know the time period, just assume it's the large topic, which really is just the market revolution. So we know that we're looking at how did women's lives do something in the market revolution during the time period that's really the market revolution. Now let's get to this weird one, which is foster change. Now we have not done this type of essay, so I'm going to go over really quickly what this essay type is and what you're going to see. So this is what we call a change in continuity essay. A change in continuity essay is an essay where you're specifically looking for what changed during a time period, so in this case, the market revolution, and what stayed the same during that time period. That is what is called a continuity. That's the fancy term for what stayed the same. So these essays always include a subtopic, and all your evidence must directly relate to the subtopic. That's probably the hardest thing to do in a CCOT essay, is it has to relate. So I'm going to pretend that I have this essay prompt. Evaluate the extent to which Miss Ray, coming to Skyline, fostered change in her teaching between 2017 and 2019. Obviously, you're not going to see this on the AP exam, but it'd be really cool if you did. But anyways, so we're going to pretend that this is our essay. So we go to set our T-chart up. So first off, we have to look at our big topic. So our big topic is going to be Miss Ray coming to Skyline. Our subtopic is going to be her change in teaching. So I'm looking at some sort of a change in teaching while Miss Ray is at Skyline. Don't laugh at me. Okay, so looking at our T-chart. So our T-chart, the left T-chart on a CCOT essay is always going to be change. The right T-chart is continuity. Why is it called a CCOT? Change and continuity over time. That's what that stands for. CCOT, change and continuity over time. So this is my T-chart. So let's look at some things that might work for this T-chart. So remember, we're directly going into the topic and the subtopic. So taught AP for the first time. That has to do with Miss Ray coming to Skyline because that was the first time I taught AP. And it has to do with changes in my teaching because obviously changing to AP is different than teaching a core class. Teaches 280 students a year versus 100. That was a big change for me. So Before, I only taught 100 students. I came to Skyline. This changed my teaching because now I teach 280 students. Uses Remind. So before I came here, most of my students did not have cell phones. And so coming to Skyline, that fostered change, that created change in my teaching because now I use Remind. So let's talk about things that would not work. So these are some examples of things that you should not look for in an essay like this. So let me give you the first example. Having a kid. So let's talk about change. Did that change during this time period? Yeah, obviously. I had a kid in February. Did that change my teaching though? Now I always hear, well, it's close enough. I can relate it somehow. If you're saying, but it does work, I promise, it probably doesn't work and you should exclude it. So if I really wanted to stretch it, I could say it changed my teaching, but the reality is it's a stretch. So anything that's a stretch, you should not use. The second example is teaching in a different room. Did this happen when I moved to Skyline? Yes. Did it really change my teaching? No. So this would be an example of an unrelated thing. Did I really have a big change happen in my teaching because I changed rooms? No. So the two things you should never use is one, something that's a stretch, and two, something that is really unrelated and doesn't work. So for example, if I think of the market revolution example, one thing that would be a stretch is you could possibly talk about how women, I don't even know, we could say women helped people in the War of 1812, for example. Did it happen during the market revolution? Technically, yes. 1812 is between 1800 and 1850. Does it really work? No. Okay. And the second one, something that's completely unrelated. So for a lot of times in this essay, I get a whole bunch of people that write me this essay on judicial review. Does judicial review apply to women? Does it really apply to market revolution? No. So let's talk about some continuities that work. Teaching social studies. That's a continuity. Prior to this, prior to teaching at Skyline, I taught social studies. At Skyline, I still teach social studies. 2, has taught AP the entire length. That's something that has continued throughout the time, and I still teach AP US. That hasn't changed, so that continues. And then continues to have US history as your favorite subject. That's from before and now. Things that do not work. Number 1, works in Utah. Do I technically still work in Utah since prior to 2017? Yes. Does that really matter for this essay? No. So you don't want big topics. So for example, in this time period, I always hear in the market revolution essay that people write, something that continued during this time period is women worked. Okay. Is that really a good example? No. Or I always see during this time period of the market revolution, lots of things were happening and lots of inventions happened. Does that really apply to our essay? No. So make sure it's specific. And then the second, still likes Disney. And I always get this. Does it relate whatsoever to the essay topic? No. So I always get people in this market revolution essay that talk about how continuing during this time period, slavery began to increase. Does that happen? Yes. But does it really apply to this essay? No, unless you were specifically talking about women slaves. So I want you to go ahead and take the next... Wait, why do I have two different... Oh, okay. So looking at this essay prompt really quickly, this is what we're looking for. So you have to create a T-chart on how did women's lives change during the market revolution and stayed the same between that time period. So I want you to go ahead and take 5 minutes. And again, you could work with a partner. You could work on your own and fill out this T-chart. Remember the requirements of a T-chart. Remember what PSE stands for, political, social, economic. Left side of your T-chart, the top is going to be change. You need at least 5 things in your left. It can be in any category. On the right is going to be continuity. How are things staying the same for women during this time period? At least 3. And remember, make sure it relates to that topic and that subtopic. Remember, everything must be to do with women and everything must connect to the market revolution. So go ahead and take 5 minutes, pause this video, and fill out this T-chart. Once you feel like you finished it, come back. All right, so going through very quickly, so hopefully I can finish this in the next 5 minutes so you have 50 minutes to be able to work. So going through really quickly on the different parts of the essay. So the first part is historical context. How the heck am I supposed to contextualize this essay? This is hard, okay? So let's go through really quickly how to contextualizing it. So there's really 2 different ways that you contextualize this. The first is contextualizing the market revolution. What happened before to cause the market revolution to occur? So I want you to go ahead and think for a second about some options that you could do with that. Then let's look at the other option, contextualizing women. So, for example, how could you contextualize women during this time period? What happened before to lead to the changes that could happen? So think about that for a second too. So I'll give you a couple of examples really quickly of some things you can do for the market revolution. So the first is the first industrial revolution. Talk about inventions that led to, for example, the Lowell system, or just in general, the market revolution. Prior to 1800, the first industrial revolution began. This was a rapid period of time of inventing and then connecting it to something along the lines of during the first industrial revolution, many changes in the economy began to take place, which is now known as the market revolution, something like that. And the second one is the cotton gin. Why it's a good one? It connects directly to the textile mills. So those are some options. Contextualizing women. For example, the American Revolution. How did women impact the American Revolution? How did the cult of domesticity? What is that? What was Remember the Ladies? And what was Republican motherhood? So just remember on those prior to the time period. Oh, well, that got messed up, but hopefully you can see it. Prior to the time period, continue your definition, and most important on number 3, connect it to your essay. That's the biggest issue I see. Have to connect it to either the market revolution or connecting it to women's rights. So, if you remember our LEQ that we've worked on previously, this was our setup. If you look at the little box that says LEQ Setup Guide for CCOT, go ahead and click on that. And really all we're changing in this is instead of causes, we're now doing effects. So I made for you a nifty little thing that is an overview. So most people chose option 2 on the last essay. You can continue to do whatever you want. But really all this is changing continuity. So your argument, 3 changes, define and explain, and your counter argument, which is just your continuities. And again, like I talked about before, they do not have to connect to your changes. They could if you wanted to. So for example, you said one change was that women began to go into the workplace, but your continuity is that it's pink jobs still. It can connect, but it does not have to. So, circle context we talked about before. Don't forget how to do it. Thesis. Now you're just changing it to CCOT. So, pretending like that top one is our essay prompt. I could do, although the Revolutionary War fostered change in women's lives between 63 and 1800. Remember LOQ, language of the question. Through Republican motherhood, daughters, liberty, and Remember the Ladies. Those are my 3 evidence points. And then women continue to be defined by traditional gender roles and confined to the cult of domesticity. So that's an example of a thesis. So going into my change paragraphs. To get the define point, 2 to 3 sentences defining the change. So the Revolutionary War changed women's lives in many ways between 1763 and 1800. One way to change women's lives was through Republican motherhood. Those are your topic sentences. Republican motherhood was a system where women would get an education in order to help their sons become politically involved. Typically, only rich women could go to schools. And I just realized in here, I should have used language of the question a little bit better. So I should have put Republican motherhood was a change as it was a system or something like that. So now you have to say why it was a change. Prior to this, women were not allowed to get an education because they were trapped in the cult of domesticity. They were seen as less than men, and this included their education. However, once women began to have more rights in the Revolutionary War, they wanted to continue to gain more rights, particularly in politics. Because America was expanding to the political side of the country, this was an opportunity for women to gain more rights to education. And again, it's 11 o'clock at night, so rereading this, I should have put the word change in there. So if I could change this, I would say something along the lines of they continue to gain more rights, particularly in politics. This was a change because, and then adding something in there because prior to this. So what I would do as a whole is before this explain area, so prior to this women were not allowed, I would just do this was a change because prior to this women were not allowed to. So make sure you add that to where the prior to this is. Again, saying something along the lines of this was a change because. I'm sorry I didn't add this in. It's really late. Okay. So, going into the continuity paragraphs. So, explain your 2 continuities. So, although many things changed during this time period, several things stay the same. One example of a continuity was that women were still confined to the cult of necessity. Defining it, throughout 1763 and 1800, women continued to be seen in these roles. That's too short. We have to expand, remember, complexity and unicorn point. So, for instance, although women were giving an education, this was still benefiting the men. This is because women's education was specifically to help her sons, and blah, 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 blah. Just make sure that you're really expanding on that. So, again, looking into this is your setup. You can either do option number 1 or option number 2 to be able to do that. And again, the only big change that you need to add that I should have added before is, again, on this change paragraph, on that second bullet point to get the explain point, please begin that first white bullet with, this was a change because. Sorry, I didn't add that before. Anyways, so hopefully this is an explanation of how you can be able to do this. So for the rest of the day, you have work time. You can help other people. You can ask for help, but that should not include, hey, what did you write? Oh, perfect. I'm going to rewrite this on my essay. Remember, don't use Google. Use your brain. So you should use your own notes. This one's a little bit hard to be able to do. Do your best. If you do finish it in time, which I don't think you will, you can always turn it in. I'll get that created for you. If not, this whole essay is due on November 15th. I'm not going to change that date. I know it's forever away. You should be able to do most of this. The only reason I'm not changing the date is because you have a couple of bigger homework assignments over the next couple of days that I don't want to interrupt. So just be aware of that. Try your best. And if you have any questions, let me know. You can always send me an email with like an excerpt and say, hey, does this look all right? And then just let me know. You can listen to music while you do this. Just make sure you're working, because last time we had a work day, some of you chose not to work. So just remember that. And then have a great day.